Dr. Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, with great respect to all of my colleagues, I'm not tone deaf to myself. I've had the privilege of sitting both on the State Board and on this commission, and I've absolutely no interest in supporting a set of regulations that in any way contradict what I've supported on this commission. I would point out that additions and differences are not contradictions unless they are actually contradictions. That's the first point. The second point is I've had the privilege of working with New York, New Jersey, New Mexico, Tennessee, and Louisiana as they have undertaken major changes in their teacher preparation programs. I have to report to this commission that in those 5 states, and I do not believe they are in any way atypical, because they are a great range, this process has been very difficult. Very difficult. The process has been very remarkably similar to this one, in the sense that stakeholders have been part of long discussions. On the State Board, we have been discussing with stakeholders for over 2 years. We have watched the recommendations of those other bodies come to us in a process, I promise you, has brought déjà vu to my head many times. The problem of self-reform is deep. I had the privilege of being a dean of a school of education for 8 years, a very large public state school of education. Change was agonizingly difficult. It is, to quote Senator Pinsky and somebody else, a heavy lift. Change, fundamental change, is a heavy lift. And it is absent from my memory that those who are understandably deeply invested in a set of practices that is the only set of practices they have known are enthusiastic about remodeling those expectations around change. It is difficult to think about how you drop programs to add credits, or you drop credits to add different substance. It is difficult to think about extending 12 new credits to cover new competencies. It is difficult to have clinical experiences that are a year long. But the state of Louisiana, which is one of the most improved on NAEP and one of the poorest in the United States, after immense pushback, has in fact instituted that requirement. So on the macro point, we can't talk forever. We have looked at endlessly the pushback on change, and we have made what we regard as the morally vital decision that change can only come with leadership, even in the face of some natural resistance. Now, on the details, very quickly. Again, I'm not tone deaf to myself. That's what comment periods are about. There have been some entirely reasonable thoughts. Nobody on the State Board is interested in insulting language. And the idea that having been pointed out, we would endorse it is offensive. We will not. Secondly, on the question of the National Board, which is an important point that Senator Pinsky made, I assure this commission that as a member of the State Board, I will go back and look again at the complementarity of the 2 languages, of the fact that the consensus must be preserved between Kirwan and the board. On the question of when the 50% release comes for the vital task of mentorship, we will ensure that there is a timeline that is sensitive to the establishment of that career ladder, so that it is not an incoherent or contradictory requirement. So on those details, of course, there is no desire to be unresponsive at all. There is a desire to be thoughtful and to get it right. But in the end, it is going to be a heavy lift. And on the real stuff of accountability, for example, the fact of the matter is that other states have managed this. We are not talking about individual teacher data. I want to repeat that. There is no question of individual teacher data. We are looking at cohort data, as do many other states, and the performance of cohorts out of schools of education over multiple years, and tracking that back to the schools that put them out there. That seems to us to be minimally responsible to the children of this state. So I think we need to finally to divide the points that frankly are there for effect, emotional and otherwise, to say, how could the State Board do this? That is precisely what every public comment period is for. It is precisely why we put things out for public comment, and it's why we listen to the public comments. That's quite different from saying, oh, you have to go back to the drawing board and go back to the collaboration and go back to the conversations. With deep respect, we have spent several years hearing the defense of the status quo with very minor willingness to make changes. That won't get it done. Last thing I will say, in 1910, the Flexner Report responded to work at Johns Hopkins, recognizing that schools of medicine across the United States had to undergo major change. There was enormous pushback, explicitly on the clinical requirement. Today, the idea that we would just have future surgeons sort of dip in and out of clinical experiences is unthinkable. The kind of rigor that we've put into our medical profession did not come easily. It did not come with the support, I have to be honest, of those schools of medicine. It was difficult. It was a heavy lift. And we should not, as a school, as a state board, we should not endorse changes for which there is no funding. That is absolutely well taken. And we will look at that match. But at the same time, our first responsibility is not to adults. It is to children. And it is to the caliber of teachers that we place in front of them.